In this episode, you'll hear some sensitive topics. So, with this trigger warning, if you have little ones around, please grab your headphones now.
And I've had quite a few people in this last year that have been working on their career stuff. Like, is this what I want to do? And quite a few that have just quit their jobs and decided that this is not what they want to do. And they want to have a life that has more balance. So it's interesting, to have people navigating this post-pandemic. But it sounds like to me, and the experience of it to me, is people really want more meaning. They really want to have an experience of life.
Folks, that was Tanya Veluz, this week's guest, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Knowing her purpose in life early in her childhood has set Tanya on an inspiring path to help the people she serves heal from trauma. You'll want to tune in to hear Tanya's story and the tools she shares that helps her clients heal and build emotional resilience. Let's cue the intro. Welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast, the show that empowers you to live an enriching life physically, mentally, and spiritually. I am your host, Benjamin Ye, and I created this podcast to give you perspectives on how to strengthen your mindset so that you can build optimal health, create aligned wealth, and connect with your higher self. It's all interconnected. Let's get to work. There's a quote I want to share. Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. This quote was by Fred Rogers. Folks, welcome to episode 55 of the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm excited to invite a new guest, Tanya Veluz, to our show. I've known Tanya as a friend for the past 5+ years, and I'm really happy that she gets to share her wisdom and experience with all of us today. As a brief background, Tanya Veluz is a licensed marriage and family therapist practicing in Pasadena, California. She specializes in treatments of parents, couples, and perinatal populations. In this work, she has found many people have trauma histories in need of repair to have healthy family lives. Her purpose is to help parents heal their past to be the parents and partners that they want to be in their families. So without further ado, here's Tanya Veluz. Tanya Veluz, welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Ben.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Tanya. I am so happy you're here, and I love to dive in to your origin story. So tell us a little bit about, where did it all start for you and what led to what you are doing today?
Interestingly enough, actually, I've probably known that I wanted to be a therapist since I was in middle school. My middle school was unique in some ways. They actually did a little test that they gave everybody so that you can kind of get a sense of the things that might just naturally work for you and your personality. And therapist was one of the things on the list. And then also we had a peer counseling group. So you could join the group kind of like any other club that you would join. And they actually taught you how to support people and how to mediate. And we would mediate issues that came up between the students. And so we were like peers that would help them figure out how to manage their discrepancies and not have to be suspended from school, essentially. So that all led me to continuing down that path. I really loved being able to help people. I wanted to see people improve. I loved that people didn't get suspended from school, and it was like a really positive experience. And it also, in that process, kind of build my self-confidence and my worth And it's just kind of a win-win. So I went for it and I knew what my path was going to be. And I still love it to this day. I mean, I really still love being able to work with my patients and see them improving. I especially love working with parents. So that's like where my heart and soul is. And I love to see them working on themselves to better their ability to be present as parents. And that just, it really, really gives me a lot of joy.
Wow. So that's actually very rare to be able to, it feels like you had that innate knowing early on in your life that this is a path that you want to take. Sometimes it takes people a while for them to actually get there. And so I'm just curious, like, was there a certain aspect of therapy that you being that middle schooler just knew like, oh, this is my calling? Like, was there some exercise you did at school, or was it something that you heard about therapy that just kind of prompt that spark in you?
Think in my friend groups and even with adults, I was always seen as someone that was a good listener or was told I was an old soul, or I
Mm.
kind of had this sense of myself in that way. So then being able to sit in a room and have someone tell me things that they wouldn't tell anybody else. Some of these students wouldn't talk to their parents or any teachers or anybody else. They would only tell me. And so that felt like a pretty special honor to hold that kind of space for someone.
Yeah. Taking a step back, in terms of a broader understanding of what therapy means, for those that are new to therapy, like how would you explain what therapy is? And what is it and what is it not?
Yeah, I can always go with what it's not first sometimes
Sure,
because a lot of
sure.
people come in with expectations, right? And they'll come and say, I haven't done this before. Is this going to be like Sopranos? Do I lay down on the couch? There's a lot of ideas about what it looks like because people have seen it in media. I think
Mm,
that there's more and more out there now, so there's a little better understanding of what it looks like. But essentially, it's having a really healthy relationship with somebody and making sure that that person feels seen, heard, valued. And my job as a provider is to make sure that I'm understanding what it is that they want to get out of treatment, and I stay focused on that. There may be other things that pop up, and I might share that with people like, oh, I'm noticing this. Is that something you'd want to work on as well? And it might not be, right? It's not my job to force something. It's my job to recognize what they want to do and accomplish and ensure that we're getting there. And so
mm,
I'm always checking in with clients. I'm always making sure that we're on track with where they want to be going. It could be that we're working on parenting skills. It could be that we're working on, you know, regulating a little bit better. So if I get easily frustrated or as a parent, I yell and I don't want to do that anymore. I have people coming in to work on that. I have people coming in and saying, I just worry all the time about things. I have a hard time getting to sleep. Let's work on that, right? It really can be anything that someone sees value in and really gives them a better sense of purpose and meaning in their life in general.
mm. And the type of practice that you practice, I recall that you're a licensed marriage and family therapist, right? And
Right.
so can you tell me a little bit more about that specific field?
Yeah, so basically with that degree, you can treat individuals, you can treat couples, you can treat families, children. So it's really pretty broad, run groups, all of it. So there is a little bit of a focus more on the family work and training. So in grad school, there's some extra kind of courses around working with families and children. And that's mostly what we are focused on. And the degrees, I think, can get a little confusing for people because there's also licensed clinical social workers. They have same education, same abilities. Some of their training is a little more focused on like macro level, looking at systems. But interestingly enough, they kind of align in the work because macro systems can look a lot like family systems.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of very similar qualities in the training.
Got it. And years that you've practiced, have you seen either a shift of what things that you're do they call it patients, I guess, that you take, right? Is it, or clients?
It can be clients or patients. It does
Clients or patients.
depend. Typically, if you're in private practice, you would say clients. I come from a medical background at Kaiser, so we tend to say patients. So I tend to interchange it at times.
Got it. Okay. So from the patients and clients that you see over this past like decade, have you seen like a shift of what's been, just been on top of minds for people and what, want to work through with you?
There's definitely a shift, from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. I think there's definitely been a shift. The pandemic was particularly hard on families and parents with children, and it's been hard on relationships. So I have a lot of couples right now working on their relationship post-pandemic, trying to rebuild some closeness, connection, rebuilding tools, trying to improve on how to be more present. There is a kind of overall global sense of people wanting to slow down.
Hmm.
I think it was hard to be isolated, but people started to recognize that there was also some benefits to slowing down.
Hmm.
A lot of people kind of struggling with how to maintain some of the positive from that experience while also trying to exist in our current society. And so it's a bit conflicting for people. And I've had quite a few people in this last year that have been working on their career stuff. Like, is this what I want to do? And quite a few that have just quit their jobs and decided that this is not what they want to do. And they want to have a life that has more balance. So it's interesting, to have people navigating this post-pandemic. But it sounds like to me, and the experience of it to me, is people really want more meaning. They really want to have an experience of life.
Yeah. And probably is because having almost like a forced break from the pandemic, of what you preconceived notion of what your daily routine might look like, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, there's a strong pause. It's like, oh wait, am I on the right track, or do I need to be running a different track, right? And wow, okay. And so, you mentioned before what therapy isn't. What do you find has, from a public eye, been like the biggest misconception of what people often think therapy is, right? You mentioned like, is it what media portrays like in Sopranos and whatnot? But I'm just
Mhm.
curious, like, what is there one that particularly that you find that you often just dispel for folks that might have a misunderstanding of?
Yeah, I used to have a lot of people when I worked at Kaiser. The department itself was called psychiatry, and I think they've since started changing things over to behavioral health. But
Hmm.
just the name in and of itself was really activating for people, and so they'd come in for the intake in tears, just really upset that they even had to be in this department.
Oh.
And the fear was that they were crazy or they were broken. There was something severely wrong with them. And I think that the belief is that if I'm in psychiatry, then I must be dealing with a severe mental health issue. And that's not really equal to. It
Hmm.
really is, like, I would say 80, 90% of the people that we would see in that department were just struggling with some anxiety or daily life experiences, events that happen that, are hard for us. And they were situational or momentary. They needed tools, they needed strategies to get through it, and then they were okay again. So I think that that's the biggest thing that keeps people from treatment,
Right.
having to walk into some place feeling like, oh, this means that I really do have something wrong with me. And so if I can dispel that for people, it's really, really helpful. The other one that I get a lot is like, I can't take medications. Medications are bad. And there's a big like pharmaceutical issue. I think people have a lot of beliefs, and some of those I completely understand and agree with. But at the same time, people feel like if they take an antidepressant, it's going to make them dependent. And it's not a kind of medication that would make you dependent. It's not a fast acting medication. It takes a while for something like an antidepressant to kick in. Anything that's fast acting cannot be something that you are addicted to or dependent upon in that way. And so I really try to help people understand when you're looking to feel better, we want to put all those things on the table. and we try things on, and we kind of keep all the doors open so that we help people get better. Medication doesn't have to be forever. A lot of times it isn't. Most people only stay on meds for, 6 months, a year, and they might come
Mm.
off when they're starting to feel better. But other people will say this is way better, and I don't want to come off of it once they've been on. So, but those are the two big things that I see a lot, is people feeling like this is bad. I must be really bad off, or I can't take medications because I'm going to end up dependent.
Got it. Well, and so what I got from that, Tanya, is that sometimes the words, like you said, psychology, right? Was that the department?
I agree. Yeah.
Right. That words might be triggering for some folks, depending
Mhm.
on, their preconceived notion of what that word means for their family or their culture. And, I mean, before we even started hitting record today, we were talking about intentions, and the intention really for me, and what I love about bringing you on to our show, is that just want to bring more light and awareness on how people can just heal and cope through experiences and trauma they might have experienced in their lives. And therapy being also just one avenue, because there's never one size fits all. And it's really what's the size that fits best for you.
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's a pretty good segue to the next question, is just understanding some of the tools and techniques that you help your patients and clients with. I think one of the techniques you mentioned was EMDR. I'd
Mhm.
love for you to share, what is that tool of EMDR and how does it help in your sessions and your clients?
Well, I'll talk first maybe about trauma. I think
Yeah.
you have other podcasts where you actually do talk about trauma, but I think everybody hears the word trauma and sometimes they think of um, being severely abused as a child, like their parents are really harming them. They think about what we call big T traumas as traumas. Those are the only things that can be trauma.
Mm.
And there's lots of things that could be trauma. Certainly, having physical, emotional abuse or sexual abuse as a child could be a big T trauma. But we also experience what we call little T trauma, and that little T trauma can be repeated negative experiences over time. And so, if you have a parent that is just kind of putting you down periodically, but it's pretty consistent, you kind of get this internalized experience of being bad, that becomes a little T trauma. Or the big T's where someone gets in a car accident or there's something really scary. So when we look at treating trauma, historically, what the field has done is ask people to talk about it. Come and tell me what happened. And some modes of treatment historically were like, let's tell the story again, and let's tell the story again, and kind of try to desensitize you to that experience. But real big T traumas are very hard to do that, and it's super activating for people. And so a lot of people would kind of leave treatment, they wouldn't come back, which I
Mm.
understand. And so the field in the last, I would say 15 years or so, has started to really implement new and different ideas on how to treat trauma. And EMDR is one of those tools. And EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization. So essentially, the way we're helping to desensitize someone to the trauma is through the eyes. Initially, that was the only way that they would do the work, but as it has evolved, because it started back in the 80s or late 80s, it's evolved to actually being eye movements and maybe what we call bilateral stimulation. So, stimulation on either side of the body. So, some people might do tapping on either side to help with that regulation and that reprocessing. It's interesting how it came about. Shapiro is the psychologist that actually kind of learned and figured out how to use this tool that's within our body. And she, I think, had a distressing event on her mind, and she had been going for a walk in the park and was looking around and realized as she moved her eyes back and forth that distressing thought and experience was diminishing. and she didn't understand why. And so she went to kind of do some more research and figure that out, eventually leading to this now evidence-based model. And that was in the late 80s, 87. So you can imagine that back then people thought that was a little like woo-woo. And so she didn't get a lot of accolades in the beginning, but she continued her work. She created a really detailed protocol. It's a very structured way of working through reprocessing. And then when fMRI scans came out, it became more of an evidence-based practice. So basically what it does is we kind of go to maybe an event. If I'm using a car accident as an example, I would go to that event in my mind. What's the worst part of that? That I have maybe an image in my mind. I look at, how that makes me feel in my body. There's also some cognitive stuff that's usually attached to that. What does it mean about me that, this happened? Right. And sometimes people are like, oh, I was so stupid. I shouldn't have been driving that way. Things like that. What would you rather believe about yourself? Well, it was kind of out of my control, right? It wasn't my fault, or I'm good enough. There's a lot of different themes that can come out of it. And then we start what we call bilateral stimulation. So we actually start with either the eye movements, and it's keeping your head still and your eyes moving from kind of as far left to as far right as you can go, back and forth. And then we're stopping periodically. But as we do that, we're really kind of assessing and letting the brain go wherever it needs to go. We're really opening up the brain and allowing the brain to have better access to an adaptive processing network. So we have the ability to be adaptive, but in trauma, we kind of get stuck in that place. It's kind of a little capsule where that gets stored. And so it gets isolated. And so when we do the bilateral, it kind of opens it up and allows us to have more access to the adaptive ways of thinking about things. And the goal is, after we're done with bilateral, somebody has typically come to a place of saying, oh, okay, that this wasn't my fault, or here are the pieces that, I could do better, but I'm not bad because of this. And now that experience gets laid down in that memory bank. And so now both things are held at the same time.
Got it. As I'm listening to you talk, Tanya, it reminds me of that quote where energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only transform from one form to another. And the reason why I bring up that quote is because whether we know it or not, if we're going through a little T or a big T traumatic experience, sometimes that story and that narrative of how we experienced it, that energy of that emotion might still be locked up in either our minds or subconscious or even our bodies, right? And it just feels like, one of the techniques that you're describing of EMDR is helping you to unlock that so you can transform that energy from one form to another. Because it's without that awareness, you need to have that awareness before you can have that change. Disclaimer, I'm not a doctor here. So I'm just fascinated by this topic because I just want people to understand there's a lot of different techniques, and whichever one that resonates with you is to find that professional help, find that professional help to help you walk through that. Because it sounds like this is a process that probably is best guided by a professional, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
You always have to explore, because with trauma, we can have what we call abreactions, where someone's kind of right back in it, and we don't want that. So professionals trained to be able to keep it as safe as possible for you and build in other tools and things before you even do the work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Got it. And another technique you mentioned offline before is havening. And I'd love to hear more about that, because I feel that one is the eye movement to be able to, it feels like it's just giving your circuitry a bit of a break with the eye movement to help you rewire, well, what's the emotion do want with it, right? Can you tell a bit more about how this havening work?
Yeah. So the difference is with EMDR, the eye movement, it's the optic nerve going into the limbic system. And that's what's allowing the reprocessing, the bilateral stimulation to start occur. And the optic nerve kind of goes straight into the limbic system. So you have really good direct access. With havening, we're using the body as bilateral stimulation. So it's a touch-based tool. And this was developed by doctors Ronald and something Rudin. They're both Rudin brothers in New York. And they had heard about tapping, and there's more and more people kind of interested in tapping. And so they got curious, and they recognized that when you tap certain areas in the body, people were experiencing relief from anxiety. And so they explored it further and realized that touch is really, really important. So when we apply touch pretty much anywhere on the body, like if I touch my kneecap, I might be activating this process. And what happens is we're kind of activating what we call delta waves in the brain. And with that, we release GABA and serotonin. But if I touch my kneecap, I'm probably not going to release that much GABA, serotonin. I might not get a whole lot of delta waves going. So what they found is that there were certain areas of the body where you apply touch and you actually release more. So over the eyes and under the eyes and back out, if we touch in this area, usually I just do a nice light touch around the eyes. Everybody likes a little bit different pressure, but this will release 90 times more GABA and serotonin than anywhere else in the body.
Oh, wow.
So this is kind of your biggest bang for your buck in a sense.
Describing this visual that I'm seeing what you're doing, it's almost like you're tracing, if you had to pretend you had raccoon eyes, you're almost like tracing the boundaries of around your eyes, right? And this like, infinity or eight kind of like motion. Is that fair to say?
That's a good way to describe it, definitely. Yeah. And most people really love this. It's pretty soothing. And you can see videos online of like people doing this with their babies and them just like passing out. It's very soothing. And then the second place that they found was top of the shoulders. So you kind of do a butterfly hug to yourself. So you're crossing your arms across your chest and touching the top of your shoulders and running your hands down your shoulders and your arms. And as you go down your arms, this is the second place. And there's about 30 times more GABA and serotonin that's released by this touch versus anywhere else in the body. Mm. And the last one is palms of the hands. So if we just rub the palms of our hands, we usually get about 13 to 18% more than anywhere else. Mm. People like the arms. Sometimes they like it with like a little sweater on, or they like it bare armed. Some people feel like it's a hug. Some people don't like it. So there isn't really a right or a wrong. It's really just to recognize like what feels right to you. Hands, the palms of the hands, I think pretty much everyone loves, and it's great because you have access to that all the time. So what I love about havening is you do need to do it with a professional. You need to learn how to do it, but it can also be a tool that you can take with you anywhere. I can't send my clients home to do EMDR by themselves, but I can teach them how to do havening, right, and can take this with them. And I have a lot of business owners that are in meetings or stressful experiences where they can just rub their hands together and kind of calm their nervous system down. If you wear glasses, you can kind of get away with doing your eyes a little bit without anybody kind of batting an eye. But it's a little harder to get away with in public. But I have a lot of people that will sit down at the end of the night, just put a pillow on their lap and kind of do their eyes for a good 30 minutes before they go to bed to just settle their nervous system down, to allow them to go to sleep easier. There's all kinds of different tools that people have kind of come up with. But I usually encourage my clients to try to do 2 minutes of havening 2 times, 3 times a day. Just take a minute, slow down, breathe, and trying to think something more neutral. Because if we're worriers, I don't want people to like haven and worry. Such a lovely tool. And mostly, gosh, I would say 95% of my clients love this tool. I have lots of techniques and lots of different modalities that I'm trained in, but havening is one of the one things people come back and maybe I see them a year later because they've graduated from care, but they've come back for something else, and that's the thing they're still using.
Got it. And this is a technique to help you calm your nervous system. So if you're feeling anxiety or
For different things, right? You can do it
okay.
for that, right? And it's
Hmm.
great because you do have access to it whenever,
Right.
but you can also use havening to reprocess trauma.
Oh.
So very similarly, you would pull up that traumatic experience if you're doing event havening, and you would access what it feels like in the body. And then we kind of use distractions and walk through this protocol in order to move through the trauma.
So the emotional roller coaster then becomes a little bit more of a softer wave than it is like this oscillation of up and down. It's kind of what I'm sensing
Yeah,
here. Right?
the Rudins talk about this idea of depotentiation, which I think really helps to prove the point of we can actually heal
Mm,
from things. Because a lot of times people will say, well, they have mental health issues and that's just it. That's the end of it. But it's not necessarily true. Of seeing people heal and
mm,
recover, be back to healthy, full lives. So
mhm,
the idea with depotentiation is that when we have a traumatic event, we can go back to that car accident kind of example.
mm,
And so this event happens, and now this neuron gets turned on in the brain. And it usually gets stored in the amygdala because this is something that was really scary, frightening. So this neuron gets turned on and it stays on. Unlike most neurons in the brain that kind of go on and off, this stays on. It's basically waiting for anything similar to happen so it can tell you to run or fight or freeze to survive.
mm,
And that's where we end up having this kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. We have hyperactivity and difficulty with relaxing our bodies. And so this neuron's on constantly looking for this bad thing to happen.
mm.
So when we do this work, the belief, the theory is that we turn that neuron off when we go through, havening work or EMDR, or there's lots of other trauma modalities as well. But
Mhm.
the goal, right, is that we want to turn that off so that the nervous system isn't like hyper vigilant all the time,
Right.
waiting for the bad thing to happen.
Got it. Okay. And you mentioned a word earlier that I'm wondering if there's any similarity. You mentioned about tapping. And so I do know there's a different modality called, I believe it's called EFT tapping.
Yes.
Is there similarities or differences between that and havening?
And it is similar in that they tap on the face a lot. So I think they're trying to access some of those same places that we access with touch and havening.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm not trained in EFT, so I don't know the background as much and where that's come from.
Got it.
Um, but a lot of people really love it. And there is
Hmm.
an app called Tapping Solutions
Hmm.
that people will go to and learn about Haven or learn about tapping. And it's got a lot of different tools on there. People get a lot out of that one.
From the limited knowledge I know about EFT tapping, it almost seems like you're going through the same areas of the face, but
Mhm.
rather than tracing your face, you're basically tapping those points, right? And so I guess from a layman's perspective, I think that's kind of the similarities I see from it both. But it's just amazing to hear, and it's great to hear just how many different techniques there are really out there. Aside from EMDR and havening, is there another favorite one that you have that sometimes you'll bring into the mix or?
Yeah, I love using somatic tools.
Hmm.
So most people know somatic, but not everybody knows the languaging around that. So somatic
Yeah.
meaning embodied, right? Anything
Okay.
that's somatic means that I'm in my body.
Hmm.
And so there's a few different modalities that fall under the same somatic umbrella. There's somatic experiencing, motor sensory. There's a lot of different therapists that have come up with similar work.
Yeah.
They just call it different things, basically. And I would say havening and somatic tools are the two things that I teach all of my clients, no matter what,
Hmm.
because historically, those are the two things people come back and tell me has been most helpful to them.
Yeah.
And what I see is basically the way our brain works is when the limbic system stuff lights up and we go into the fight, flight, freeze, we actually lose access to our prefrontal, where we problem solve, where we reason, where we think things through. Like all of our executive functioning is up in our prefrontal.
Hmm.
And I could teach all kinds of things in therapy, right? We can work on cognitive behavioral tools. We can talk about, processing things and gaining awareness. In the moment, if I'm triggered, I won't have access to any of that work because my prefrontal comes offline. And now I'm in more of a fight, flight, freeze response. So the best way to calm that response down is being embodied, like really getting in my body, learning how to regulate my nervous system. And so we may do tools where we do some breathing work, but there's a lot of other aspects to it where I'm actually asking people to slow down and do what we call tracking. So I'm asking them to notice, like scan from head to toe, any sensations that they're noticing in their body. And then I'm asking them to recognize, is that a neutral sensation? Is it a positive sensation? Is it a negative sensation? And then we kind of move from there. There's ways to break the negative sensations down, make them smaller, have them go away by either using the positive sensations in the body or doing things like resourcing, where we might think of something that feels safe and relaxing, things like that. Or we might do grounding work where we just really calm the body down and really sense into our seat and our back against the chair and our feet on the ground. And all of that really calms the nervous system down quickly because it's embodied, it's faster than me trying to access my prefrontal where it's come offline.
Right.
And as I am more embodied, then my brain will also come back online. So then I'm also creating a place where my brain actually has access again.
Yeah.
And then I can think.
So this is sort of a different question, but that just came to mind, Tanya, is there a difference between marriage counselor versus marriage therapist, or are they one and the same?
They can be one and the same. Since there's different kinds of degrees you can get, you have a marriage and family degree, or you have a licensed clinical social worker degree, or you have a psychologist degree. And you can have a psychologist who is a marriage counselor. You can have a licensed clinical social worker who is a marriage counselor. It's just usually they just have more training on working with couples.
I see. Okay.
I just happen to work on a degree that actually gives me training in the degree towards marriage and family. So there was education around working with families, working with couples in the actual degree process. But I've done lots and lots of trainings outside of my degree that's more focused on couples work.
Got it. Okay. So couples where if they're going through like a rough patch or something, and it's like, okay, you need sort of like a neutral person to help them navigate this rough patch, or, regardless if it's a small or big T, it's just how do you have someone be able to just help facilitate and have that transform that energy, right?
Yeah. And the couples work can be something very simple to, we have a 2-year-old that's tantruming and we don't know what to do. And so I'm doing like co-parenting work with them and helping them learn how to be a team together and how to calm their child's nervous system down as well, and keep themselves calm in those moments so that they can be more present, to really tough, like intense arguments that really are just, debilitating for people. And so it can be anywhere in between. Some people are coming in for something simple. The baby is regressing with sleep and they're not sleeping that well. And now everybody is tired and they're really struggling and they're just needing some tools and tips. Like we do that. I will work with them around that, all the way to, somebody's had some really intense traumas, which makes it really hard to trust in the relationship. And so there's a lot of trigger points that come up. So sometimes I'm doing EMDR, havening, somatic work with my couples to help with the reprocessing of trauma so that they have a better relationship in the end. Is activated or triggered by each other.
I see. Okay. And you mentioned before, because I think you recently made that crossover from used to working at Kaiser.
Yes.
Right. And now you're a private practitioner. Is that the right term? Okay. Is there a difference between the two when people is there just from layman's perspective, like, is there more of a sense of freedom how you practice, or the way you practice is essentially the same? It's just one's, I mean, are they both covered by insurance? Like, I have no idea. I'm just, these are just kind of questions that kind of comes into mind. You know what I mean?
Question, because I think a lot of people struggle with how to navigate the system.
Right.
Um, so yeah, a lot of people in private practice, there are plenty of people that take insurance in private practice, and then there's also quite a number that do not.
Okay.
Um, if you're going through something like Kaiser, then it's through your insurance, of course.
Mm.
The advantage is it's through your insurance. The disadvantage, at least when I was working there, there wasn't very good access. So
Mm.
typically, clinically, what we would expect when we're seeing a patient for the first time is that we would want to see them weekly for at least 6 weeks, usually in the beginning. And then we might move out to every other week, or we might stay at weekly depending on the severity and what's happening. That was never an option when I was at Kaiser. So, people would get seen every month, every 6 weeks, maybe every 3 weeks
Oh,
when
wow.
things are okay.
Yeah.
So in private practice, I do have more ability to see and have access to seeing clients when they need to be seen.
Got it.
It also gives me a little more luxury because in the medical center, they're going to book you back to back to back to back to back. And I can adjust my schedule to give me a little leeway. So I end up getting to spend more time with my clients.
Mm.
So I feel a better overall bandwidth now for my clients. And I see them getting better faster too. So I think, if the provider's doing well, the provider's not burned out, probably going to get better care.
Yeah.
But you can certainly call insurance and ask for a list of providers who take the insurance. And they could be in private practice, usually, if you're going to like call Aetna or things like that. Or if you have a PPO, you go to anybody that you need to. So you can pick whoever you want to go to, and then you pay out of pocket, and then you submit like a receipt to your insurance company, and they'll reimburse depending on your plan.
Mm.
So sometimes your plan will reimburse 50%, sometimes it's 80%. It really depends. You have to call.
Mhm.
But that is 80% of my patients in my practice is somebody that has a PPO.
Mm.
So I'm able to give them that, what we call a super bill at the end of every month, and then they're able to submit to get reimbursed.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's just helpful to know how to help people just navigate kind of this, if
Yeah.
they never gone through it before, right? Just to kind of understand. And so again, disclaimer, this isn't I am not licensed in this, and so it's just more informative of just letting people know that, hey, there might be options out there, and
Yeah.
how to navigate those options, right? Yeah. So Tanya, is there any advice you can share for our audience that if they're feeling just in a stressful moment in their day to day, or they might feel like they have some trapped emotions, what advice would we be able to share with them? You mentioned havening is just a really beautiful tool that they can do themselves, but I'm just curious, like, what comes into mind, just a way you can share for our listeners.
There's some really simple tools. Just doing deep breathing. I know people have heard this probably for years and years and years. I used to hear more like take 10 deep breaths. We don't tell them that anymore because everybody's a little different. I get a little hyper vigilant, like if I take in too much air. I slow it down. And as long as that out breath, so you're breathing in, and as long as when you breathe out, that out breath is nice and slow, it's going to kick your parasympathetic nervous system online. And that's the part of the limbic system that like revs things down.
Mm.
As long as you're taking slow out breaths, doesn't matter if you count or you don't count or all the things, that will help kind of slow things down. You want to add havening into that. That's a really great tool. Some of the somatic tools would be kind of looking around the room, naming things out loud that you see, like my wall is white, I have a tan bookshelf, my desk is brown, touching things. So you might touch and notice like that you're touching something metal. It might feel a little cold on your hands. So there's this sensory stuff that we can bring online to help calm the nervous system down quickly too.
Mm. I love that. And For our new listeners too that don't know, I actually created a 1 minute breath work exercise where it just simply kind of what you're saying, Tanya, as long as your out breath is a little longer than your in breath, activating that parasympathetic nervous system just to be able to, like I said, revving it down, right? So that's, if you go on our website, I'm sure I'll add the link to the show notes so they can, people that subscribe to Boom Vision will get that for free. So it's just a free tool just to be able to listen to for that MP3. And it's just 1 minute, right? It doesn't have to take
Yeah,
half an hour,
not at all. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's the other thing. A lot of people have heard about meditation, and then they feel like they need to sit and do a sitting meditation for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. That's great. And what that does is actually build your tolerance for things. It's like a self-care tool that helps build your bandwidth over time.
Hmm.
But it takes time to build that. You're really changing the neurochemistry of your brain, right? So it
Right.
takes neural pathways in the brain. So it takes time. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks. And
Yeah.
it's a lovely tool. But most people, when they're super stressed, don't go to meditation and sit down and try to meditate. They
Hmm.
usually need something like a somatic tool that calms their nervous system down fast.
Right.
And these are things that will do that, right? Just being really present. I
Yeah.
think there's another tool where it's, name 5 things you can see, and touch 4 things you can touch, and kind of go through with all your senses and really bring yourself into your body.
Yeah. The theme that I'm hearing consistently as you're describing these techniques is just in the most simplistic way is just think about how can you just bring yourself to the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if your thoughts are in the future, your thoughts are in the past, but if you're just not in the present moment, it just feels like the tools they're describing is just to help you recalibrate, just being present in a moment and in a calm state.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if you're not fully calm, but you're in a little bit more of a tolerant place, you can navigate better. And your brain is all online, you can think.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. So, second to last question is Tanya. I asked this with all of my guests, which is a time machine question. So, if the DeLorean was real and if you had the ability to travel back in time, 10, 15, 20 years ago, whatever point in moment in time that you want to travel back to, what would you say to your younger self if you had an opportunity to speak to your younger self?
It's a really good question. And I would tell myself not to worry so much.
Mm,
Just go for it. Just live life. You know,
mm,
it's easy to get caught up in, am I good enough? Am I going to make it happen? And all those worries and fears. And we could all live without that.
yeah.
We'd be better off without it.
I felt that. I felt that. It feels like, yeah, if you just concentrate on just having that, take that step, one step at a time, it's the act of doing this what builds also confidence too, right? So, yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, Tanya. And so the last question is, where can our listeners find you?
Oh, you can find me on my website, and it's Tanya Veluz, Tanya, V as in Victor, Eluz.com. And my email's on there, my phone number's on there. People are welcome to reach to me. I love working with clients. And if I am not the best fit, I will usually help people find the right fit.
And it's so lovely. And I will definitely include all your information on the show notes. So if people have that, what they heard today resonates and wanted to reach out to you, we'll definitely make that available for everyone. Tanya, thank you so much for being here. I'm getting to know you personally, but also knowing this side of you professionally. I will say this is that I'm not surprised now looking back that you knew your purpose back in middle school because I feel like just your aura and essence is it's just like that inner child. Like you already know what you want to do. And I think your demeanor, your energy, and the work that you put in, the love that you put into this practice, I can definitely sense that. And so I just want to appreciate you for being you. And thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom here with our audience today.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's been such a pleasure being with you.
Thank you, Tanya. Folks, I hope you all enjoyed today's interview with Tanya. I really appreciate her shedding more light on the different techniques and tools that have helped her clients in healing from their past and present traumas. If there's a quote I can share that can summarize the feeling I got from today's chat, it's this: raise your words, not your voice. It is rain and not thunder that grows flowers. This quote is by Rumi. Folks, I hope you allow yourself the space and grace to express with your words on what you are feeling and going through to someone that you can trust. Either someone in your inner circle, or perhaps you can find professional help like a therapist that's right for you. I hope today's interview inspires you to be kind to yourself, in that whatever you're going through, you don't have to go through it alone. If you enjoyed today's interview, share this episode with who you feel can resonate with Tanya's sharing. I invite you to hit that subscribe button to this Boom Vision podcast if you are hungry to learn how to thrive together. Until next time, folks, be kind to yourself. Be in the light. Be you. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Boom Vision podcast. If you'd like to find out more about me and this podcast, head over to benjaminyeh.com. That's spelled BenjaminYeh.com. If you haven't already, click subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.